Paper has evolved throughout many years. But is there something better, something easier, more efficient, eco-loving, eco-friendly, or eco-smart? Well, there is, here at SciTech, the natural alternative to paper, and one of the top 5 big ideas in the UK. We want to create eco-smart paperless solutions. In other words, we want to help your organisations work faster and more efficiently. SciTech have reduced the cost of going paperless by over 90% and reduced the time it takes to make your existing systems and processes paperless, so your business can create fully integrated paperless processes and launch them immediately. Plus, we'll be eliminating the costs of paper and printing. With us, you can create, sign, send, integrate, and complete documents anywhere and on any device. So, how do you go paperless? Well, simply upload your form onto the SciTech platform and it will be converted into a ready-to-use paperless mobile app form. In other words, SciTech is better than paper. And not to mention, SciTech has also been awarded Best Use of Technology in Business and is also the #1 result for paperless business forms on Google. So join us, and together we will eliminate the use of paper and its costs. And together, we can create an eco-smart paperless society. So why not take a look at our website or send us an email?
SciTech Paperless Solutions is an Eagle Labs organization. So this is Barclays Eagle Labs. It's actually something that's we're based in Cranfield University. I'll go into that in a bit more. But we're actually based with Barclays. We've been working with Barclays for perhaps a couple of years now in terms of looking at how we can develop digital solutions for the financial services industry. Now, whilst it's financial services, it's something to mention that it's actually been used, and later on you'll see that it's been used by a lot of other organizations. Any organization effectively that uses paper or has a paper type form is an organization that will benefit from what it is that we do here. In terms of speakers today, you will have myself and as well Dr. Jerome Dagonu. So I head up the digital transformation part of SciTech. I normally manage programs and projects, especially for our clients that we basically help do the transition. And then you've also got Dr. Jerome Dagonu, who is the CTO. And Jerome has been leading a lot of the innovation and the technical developments that has got us to the point where we've actually got a platform to be able to help any organization, almost any organization, make that transition as quickly and simple as possible. A lot of our research has been done with Cranfield University, of course, which is where we're based, but also, and I'll remiss not to mention the likes of Santander. On your screen right now, you will see an image, which is the lady on the left is Anna Botin. She is the executive chairman of Santander, and they've been very, very helpful. She actually saw a presentation that I did at Cranfield University. The gentleman on the right is Professor Sir Peter Gregson, who is the chairman and the vice chancellor of Cranfield University. Now, he invited us to present over there, and I have to admit, I had no idea what he was going to be there as a special guest. I would have been nervous otherwise, but nevertheless, we did a presentation. She liked it, and this was during the early days of development. She then asked us to have a look at Santander's processes and see where there may be opportunities to help Santander go paperless or save money in terms of reducing their cost by going digital and doing digital transformation. That effectively led to me leading the Santander Paper-Free program, sort of consultant side of things, for a good, I think, 18 months from mid-2016 and handed it over in January 2018. But within that time, we actually embarked on a specific project, a program of projects, one of which was to help them go digital and paperless. And what I'm glad to say is that using the techniques we used, being agile, very agile in terms of our solution, but it wasn't, and I'll admittedly say it's not just our solution. This was really looking at how it worked best for the client, whether or not they use the SciTech paperless, but how that integrates with it, which helped them actually look at effectively from month 7, they started saving, I think it was something like 2.1 million a month, just on the projects that we had delivered. And by the end of the year, it had actually paid itself back. Which is quite amazing, for a project looking at the business case, where in year 0, you've got a payback period before the end of 12 months. So that's quite amazing. And it just shows the power of digital transformation and how that can really help any organization when you're going from paper to paperless. So what we do essentially at Scientech is, and what we aim to do, and this is what our research has been really focused on, is looking at helping companies transition from paper to integrated paperless forms, but mainly workflows and processes of any type by making them a lot more automated, reducing the human interaction, and effectively taking away the process duplication. So the three key things that we focus on are simplicity. Now, this is all coming from some research that we had done initially, trying to understand why organizations do not do more digital transformation, because a lot of companies and a lot of people, when you ask them, you're doing something using paper, using manual processing, they admit it, and yes, but then they will then say, well, actually, it's too complicated to actually make that transition. So they shy away from it. So we realized that was one of the key reasons, the complexity, essentially. So one thing we did is make it simple. The other part, or the other reason, was speed. They will think it will take quite a lot of time, months or years, to embark on an end-to-end digital transformation program. So to that end, we made it faster. And the final part, of course, was the ease of use, basically, the ease of that transition to going for your customers and their end users from doing something one way to introducing it and doing it electronically, which there is a sort of change aspect to be addressed there. So we just made that nice and easy for organizations. So those are the three key things that we aim to focus on when we're looking at making that transition. One thing that we also realize is some sort of perception, and that's why I think it's important to understand what we mean by paper manual processes. Some organizations we talk to would say, well, we're digital already because we have a PDF of our forms, for example, let's say an account application form or change of address or change of details form. Unfortunately, what they still do is tell their customers to download a PDF from a website, complete it by pen perhaps, and sign it, scan it, and send it back to them. Now, when they receive that information, they then manually, in some cases, enter that information back onto their systems, and then either store that copy of that paper in some financial services in maybe 5 years. Some industries are much longer, or they destroy it. So there's always some sort of cost involved in that process, regardless of what it is you're doing, whether you're destroying it or storing it, as long as you're handling that piece of paper. One key thing I always tell companies is if they're holding or managing paper, imagine you're holding a 10-pound note or 20-pound note and you're throwing it away. Basically, that effectively is the way I'll relate to anybody who's still using paper of any sort to process, or in fact, if they have any manual processing. So essentially, what we've done to address that really is look at the Scientech side of things, whereby you simply allow your users to download either a form or actually start to trigger a process. They complete it, and they can complete it and sign it with e-signatures and other sort of biometric technology we have now, fingerprints, face recognition, if the device that they're using supports that. And once they've done that, they will then send that information automatically to the companies, effectively the database. Some companies will have a master database they use, but more importantly, it's capturing the image of that form as well as the metadata. And the best example I can use is perhaps something like DocuSign, whereby every time you want to send a document or an agreement to somebody, you upload it and decide which email it goes to, and it will trigger that process. But it does it just for that particular agreement. Whereas in our situation, you do that once, but you don't have to determine or fix the recipient's email address. We keep that flexible, so it makes it a lot easier for companies to be able to use effectively. The key principles that we address here, we tackle or touch on here, really look at having a situation where you create once and use many. Input at source, so essentially making sure you only input information once, not 3 or 4 times, especially when it's the same information. As you can imagine, inputting the same thing more than once will result in errors. And that's what we always find when we have duplication of activity. So the other thing we always try to do is eliminate duplication. And it's not just duplication in your back office processes, where you've got somebody, entering information in one system and taking the same information and entering it in another system, but it's looking at full end-to-end duplication. So once data is entered into the system by, let's say, the initial user, nobody else needs to re-enter that information. It actually gets taken and reused wherever it needs to. And this is where the last part of it comes in, which is, I've called it data lake integration, but essentially it's integrating it with a master data source. So once the information is captured, it gets sent out to the relevant data source as it is, or big data storage area, and all your other processes and systems will be able to dip into that data source, take what they need, and carry on processing. In some situations, it actually automatically triggers a few other processes, but as long as it goes to one central database that everyone can share consistently, that's where the important part comes into it. Now, the key thing is, what exactly is it? What is this, what is this tool? What is this platform? Essentially, and I won't go through each of these line by line, but it's a digital process transformation tool. That's where you actually upload your either your form or whatever it is that you want to digitize or automate, and you simply create it there and then on that system. It's integrated with mobile apps. So we've got two platforms, iOS and Android, which effectively from all our users counts for over 99% of users. We did have Windows at the beginning. However, in 7 years, I have had one customer who has asked about a Windows app to be used. So we focus more on iOS and Android. And within both platforms, you also have the, it's optimized for your tablets and your smartphones. So that way, it just means that anybody using it will be able to use it in a sort of good user experience, regardless of where they're using it. The other part here is an SDK for using other mobile apps. This situation caters for, let's say, a big bank, for example, who has their own mobile app. Clearly, they're not going to ask their customers to download the SignTech app as well in order to do what they need to do here. So what we have done is create an SDK, software development kit, so that any company who wants to seamlessly integrate all this functionality into their existing app will be able to do that very simply. And all that will happen is next time they do an update of their app, the customers will have, or the users will have all that functionality, which will be branded, and they'll be absolutely seamless, and it'll just be the company's app itself. The other part, which is quite important, is the private on-premise solution. Now, if you use other solutions such as DocuSign, what's happening is you have third-party processing. So the data that you or your users and you actually capture is going to the DocuSign servers, being processed, and then sent back to you. That creates a whole kind of worms when it comes to GDPR, data privacy, data security. So to address all those, and particularly with working in financial services, we've actually created an on-premise solution so that effectively, if you imagine you having your very own DocuSign engine just for yourself, just for your customers to use and nobody else. So that's one of the key things that I think we've been able to break some ground on here. And finally, the Docker container available for AWS users. Effectively, from a value proposition perspective, it has been described, and this was at the Berlin, I believe, pitch marathon as an industry game changer when it comes to business process transformation. I won't go through all these, just the two key things I want to emphasize really are the immediate cost savings. As soon as an organization starts using this, they literally start seeing the cost. And these are tangible costs, really. And finally, the speed of transformation. As I said earlier on, some companies have really just started using a system, digitized one of their forms, and the very next day, all their users, their staff are using that particular process in a digital manner, as opposed to a manual or paper-based approach or manner. One of the companies that did that transformation was FDL. I like using these guys because as an example, a classic example, these engineers used to use a triplicate copy to complete their forms, and they will have one for the customer, one will be sent back to the office for processing. And it used to take about 2 weeks to invoice the customer from when the job was done. There were lots of things like errors, omissions, people couldn't read what was written, but then they switched to SignTech, and literally it was switched in a day. They did have a transition period where the managing director of the company wanted to have, I think, about a month or so to give the engineers both solutions. But I was really proud to say that all the engineers, once they started using the mobile apps, actually asked why they need to carry any papers with them. So, I mean, it was a very good transition. They did it straight away, and they've never looked back since. Now, that's just one example. You know, the solution is actually being used by a lot of other organizations, from banking to pharmacies, universities, British Gas, for example, even estate agents or letting agents. But really, it's situations where you have mainly people operating in the field who need to go out and do certain things. And that's really where you get a lot of the benefits, basically, where they can actually come back in and do whatever they need to do remotely without having to take any manual paperwork or any manual operations back to the office, essentially. I'm going to leave it at that for now, because I think we need to get to the practical side of things as opposed to going to perhaps the theoretical side of things altogether. What I will do is switch my screen. So bear with me a moment. So let's change screens. I'll now go essentially to the practical solution, the practical system itself. And hopefully you can see my screen now. I'm going to log out and start totally fresh. So essentially, this is what users will see. Users being users in the organization when they actually go to the digital process transformation engine. A lot of it will be, as I said, if it's on premise, it'll be your very own URL. In this case, it's something that's called My Paperless Office, scientechforms.com. And essentially what happens is, for organizations who do not want their own on-premise solution, can simply start using this. It's a much lower cost, and it's something that they can actually digitize the process straight away. What tends to happen is when they then start doing 1 or 2 processes, they may then decide, they want to now scale up and have something that's just on premise and private. In terms of digitizing the process, again, to be practical, it's literally a case, and if some of you have used DocuSign, you may recognize perhaps some of the workflow here. You click on Start Now, and it'll take you to a page where you'll basically do the standard things. Create a title for your documents or for your process. You can decide on the distribution option. It's always defaulted to workflow. However, you can decide to make it an email. If you make it an email distribution option, what typically happens is that it will be completed by somebody, and there'll be an automatic email address that will be in the toolbox, and you will receive essentially just the PDF or the image of the form or the process that you're sending through. However, with the workflow, what happens is an API is used, and therefore you will receive the image as well as the metadata for that particular form or whatever has been completed every time it is being completed by somebody within the workflow process. Typically, you will drag and drop your image in here, or just upload it, the PDF that would be, that, or if it's a form. And to add recipients, pretty straightforward. Simply click on Add Another, and simply add another. Now, the good thing about this, by the way, to emphasize here, is we've got something called set by recipients. And that really means that you don't have to know the people in the workflow in some situations. And the best scenario perhaps for this is if you had, let's say, a joint account application or mortgage application part of things, or for a letting agent, a tenancy agreement where you've got 2 tenants. Now, obviously, when you're creating this process, which you want to create once and use many times, you don't know who those tenants are or their email addresses. So you have a flexible thing we've called set by recipient, which means that you can actually have a mixture of unknown people integrating with the process. And this will be typically your new customers who you obviously don't have yet. And if you do have internal people to process those forms, you simply change that, the drop down, which will show you essentially the options you have and the different people that can get involved effectively in basically completing your form. So over here, I have got the set by recipients, and I can make it by the administrator. I can add myself, I can add Christian, who's my colleague, to be the person who receives that form on the next step in the process. So essentially, that's quite a straightforward way of effectively doing everything that we need to do here. What I will do, by the way, is I'm not going to really go through creating a form right now. What I will do is, and bear with me a moment, cancel this, upload a new form. What I will do is perhaps just go to an example of an existing form that we have to give you, an example of the UI. This is clearly being done on a computer, and we obviously, as I said, have the mobile apps, which is what we'll normally use. Let's see, I can open a form here, and the user interface means I can now type in the information that I have here. Business name, I'm just going to put test business, and you really just carry on completing the form in that sort of manner. I will preview it. And what you can see here is essentially the form I'm completing, and you can see that the data I'm entering is going onto the form itself. Essentially, that's really the UI we have. You don't change the look and feel of the form. You just make sure people can complete the form appropriately, and they're able to do what they need to do. One good thing to mention, though, is that when you're completing a form, you may see the form. However, you only have permission to complete the parts of the form that is relevant to you, which is quite important. So in this form that I've got, I, as a user, can start completing it. and only the office administrator, whoever has been given the permission to process this form or this application in this case, will be able to complete this section that you can see on the screen, the office use section. So this is where the workflow comes into it, where you've got somebody external to your organization completing a form or doing something, and it comes in, and then somebody else needs to actually process that form itself. So that's just an example of how things happen here. One thing I'll do, and just to mention, this is literally a very quick, short, sharp introduction to this. The three key things I'll mention here is this: the workflow. Over here, I can see where the workflow is, as in which forms have been completed and who is next in the process, the progress of it. In this case, for example, you got 2 out of 3 people who have started completing this form. And I can actually decline it if I wanted to at this stage as an administrator, or just let it carry on. In some situations, you may have a lot more people in the process. For example, over here, where you've got 5 people, and I can see it's on a 3rd person. But this helps you monitor where you are in the process. And, basically, if you had somebody internal, you can actually change who the next person is. So, for example, over here, I can change it and assign this work to another user. Let's say the Christian, for example, and click on OK there. So it's just really in terms of making sure that you can have that process flexibility on the go, which is quite important. The other part here is the metadata. Every time you complete a form, for example, you will have the metadata there in itself. So again, I'll just have a look at there. And you can actually see everything that's been collected in terms of the fields. And you can export that to another system or another process, so that you can carry on completing it or carry on with that process to use that information that's been captured. Again, which is quite a sort of key advantage here. And the last part of this that I'll show is the analysis part of it, which I quite like this, because as you collect your information, you can pre-create real-time reports to be generated. And this is just, let's say stack column chart, for example. So over here, I can literally see at the touch of a button, basically by month, the forms that have been completed, and it gives me an idea of volumes. And this is sort of management reports that you can have pre-configured, and you do it once and you never have to do them again. You can give access to your directors or whoever the decision makers are in the organization, and they can literally make real-time decisions, as opposed to having to wait for somebody to download the data and conduct some sort of analysis and get everything done, which makes things a lot slower in today's sort of fast-paced business environment. And finally, I think the key things here, just looking at the chart here with all activity. And again, that shows you the sort of work you've got at a snapshot, the number of active forms you've got, pending forms, which are waiting for somebody to take some sort of action, those that are declined and those that are completed. But essentially, this is a very quick, short, sharp introduction to the Signtech digital process transformation tool, essentially, that can be used. I think at this point, I've spoken for way too long. I shall open the floor if anybody has any questions at all.